Greetings, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and right now I'll be presenting you all the fresh update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of July the 1st. So please join to this YouTube channel, watch this review, share it with your friends, like it if you like, and also leave your comments below. I'll start with the information, the most fresh information about deep strikes which have been made deep inside Russian territory, but at least we have a lot of messages, notifications that such actions have been done. So first of all, I will make some overview of those strikes, and then we will move on to the map, especially battle map situation. So let's start today's review.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Today, we will talk about the hottest and most scandalous news from yesterday. I'll start with the hot topic. I'll start with the latest updates. Because in the city of Donetsk, here is an image of our Ukrainian Donetsk, which unfortunately is currently occupied by the enemy. Yesterday evening, several cruise missiles struck there at once. According to reports, a Storm Shadow missile hit one of the locations. There are photos and video evidence confirming the strike on the occupiers' facility. What is the facility that we see in these photos? Analysts have already determined, based on these various locations, that this is a building that previously belonged to the Donetsk State Institute of Non-Ferrous Metals. What is currently there is unknown, but the Center for Countering Disinformation and its head report that it was a location where the occupiers were stationed. There is video footage. Basically, there is enough evidence to confirm this strike, and it's quite clear that the fire was pretty intense. Let's take a look together at one of these videos to see the detailed, so to speak, consequences of this strike on Donetsk. Yeah, it was quite a blast. Looks like the little house got blown away. I'll translate. It was quite a blast. The little house got blown away. That's what they're saying. As for what kind of house it was or who exactly was located in the former Institute of Non-Ferrous Metals, we don't know. But what we do know is that there were reports saying that this was the work of Storm Shadow, Scalp Egg cruise missiles, which are currently an extremely scarce type of weapon. Extremely. They are used only in the most extreme cases when, let's say, it's necessary to eliminate someone very significant and important. So I hope they managed to catch the person our security and defense forces were targeting. During these missile attacks, these attacks that I'm about to talk about, attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation missiles were seen in the sky that somewhat resembled Storm Shadow missiles. Here is such an image. You can see it in the upper right corner, where the missile used in the strikes is actually shown as a kind of shadow. It really does look like a Storm Shadow Scalp EEG. But yesterday I already saw messages online where there were suggestions that it could be one of our missiles, although I'm not sure it really looks like it, but it could be one of its modifications. What kind of missile is this? This is our Ukrainian development, the Caution missile. Its first appearance was known back in 2014, but at that time the development was halted due to lack of funding. However, recently the relevant projects have once again gained the capacity for development. We have joint projects and funding, including for long-range strike systems from the Germans. And just yesterday, representatives of the Federal Republic of Germany arrived in Ukraine. So, all of this is connected, and there is a desire for these to be our missiles as well. But objectively, here, both in the photo of the Caution's presentation and in the photo of it flying, the missile in the air, well, we can't really identify that it's actually that one because the dimensions are completely different, you have to agree. But in terms of further development, in terms of refining these technologies that have existed since 2014 and were presented back then, it's entirely possible. I don't rule out that it could have been one of our missiles, especially since there was an air raid alert yesterday and attacks not only in occupied Donetsk, but also in the Rostov region, specifically in the area of the settlement of Shakhty. Here in the Rostov region, in fact, Donetsk itself, Shakhty, Rostov-on-Don, and its airfield were targeted by our forces. And what's most interesting and most important is that yesterday, in general, it was very unsettled on Russian territory. In many regions, a missile threat was declared. I'm convinced that throughout the day, we will learn more details about this attack that took place. In particular, once again, I will be reporting all of this on my Telegram channel. In the video description, you will find a detailed link to it. Just click and go, subscribe to my personal blog, Pekhno, or search for it as you see on the screen in the search bar of this social network. And yes, besides Rostov, things were also tense yesterday quite far from the front line in the settlement of Akhtubinsk. This is the Astrakhan region. Here is the settlement of Akhtubinsk with its Akhtubinsk airfield. It's about 700 kilometers from the front line in Ukraine. Here, 708 kilometers, as you can see. Well, give or take about 700 kilometers from the zones where launches could have originated. What's most interesting is that from Akhtubinsk, and by the way, in Astrakhan itself, there were two reports that, not two reports, but rather the occupiers in both cities reported, and this was also announced by the official authorities of the Astrakhan region, that this was not just a drone threat, but a missile danger from the Ukrainian defense forces. I emphasize, a missile. So, what exactly could we have used to strike? Here, we can speculate and guess. It could be those same Hawk missiles, Hellfire drone missiles, or other types of missile drones with different characteristics that we have used. It could be our long-range Neptune cruise missiles with an extended reach. It could be ballistic missiles, because yesterday Russians were also making noise on some of their channels claiming that this is in fact a threat, including from Ukrainian ballistic missiles. The exact consequences after the strikes, after the hits, after the attacks on Akhtubinsk, Astrakhan, Shakhty, and Rostov-on-Don are currently unknown. But the fact remains that missiles really were flying into these regions, the southern districts of the Russian Federation, to the North Caucasus. And this was actually reported on the occupation resource. I'm not making this up. As I said, even the authorities of Astrakhan Oblast reported this. Plus, friends, fresh satellite images have appeared of one of the latest attacks that took place on the territory of the Russian Federation in the Volgograd region. There, to the west of Volgograd, is the Marinovka airfield, which our forces attacked on the 27th of June. And here are the satellite images that have appeared of the Mali Marinovka airfield. Earlier, in fact, the operators of this attack reported that 2 aircraft were destroyed and another 2 were damaged as a result of this attack. Now, according to OSINTers, conclusions can be drawn, although honestly, I can hardly make out anything in these photos, but the OSINTers claim that these photos show that at this point, it is worth talking about the damage to 5 Su-34 the Su-34 is a fighter bomber of the Russian Federation, which is used for bombing and dropping guided bombs on our positions. Accordingly, in Marinivka, OSINTers counted 5 damaged aircraft, 3 fighters were completely burned, and 2 more were partially damaged. Previously, the numbers were 2 and 2, but now it's 3 and 2. And by the way, this is according to the Cyber Boroshno community, which, by the way, does not specialize in exaggerating Ukrainian victories, so to speak. They are objective in their assessments. That's why we can trust that the number of enemy equipment losses in particular has changed. In addition, some interesting trends are emerging overall, because recently Russian aircraft have been increasingly and more frequently struck right at their bases and airfields. 5 of these units in Marinivka, and over the weekend there were also reports about 3 more pieces of enemy aviation equipment in Kirovsky. That's the Kirovsky airfield in occupied Crimea. Apparently, 3 helicopters were hit there at once. These are Mi-8, Mi-28, and Mi-25 helicopters, as well as a Pantsir S-1 anti-aircraft system. This is specifically on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. That's why there are quite a few interesting attacks happening. What they are leading to, honestly, it's still a bit difficult for me to put 2 and 2 together. But of course, I would like it to at least remotely resemble the Israeli operation of wiping out both enemy aircraft and enemy air defense systems, after which Israeli and American bombers actively entered Iranian territory. Although, of course, in our case, this is a very, very distant prospect. In fact, it's not at all certain that it is achievable with the resources we currently have. Now, let's move directly, folks, to the battle map and talk, as I said, starting with the operational hot strike on Russian territory. And now, let's talk about the pressing and controversial issues. The pressing and controversial issue is the Novopavlivka direction and the enemy's advance there. At the same time, the reaction of Ukrainian media to how information is presented, covered, and processed is also a pressing issue. So what actually happened yesterday here on the Novopavlivka direction, let's take a look at the changes that have occurred on the deep state map. Deep state shows enemy advances in the area of Shevchenkove and Vilnepol, or more precisely, clarifies the situation regarding positions here in the area of Fedorivka, Zeleny Kut, Oleksivka, and Boatyr. In the area of Yalta, Zaporizhzhia, and near Dubne, the expansion of the gray zone and attention, the gray zone has expanded in one of these areas, such as the settlement of Dakhne. Dakhne is already in the Dnipropetrovsk region. And so many people noticed here on the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region, this expansion of the gray zone. You can actually see this small incursion, in fact, as an expansion of the gray zone into the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region. And what we saw as a result was that hundreds of Ukrainian Telegram channels and dozens of other media outlets were suddenly filled with reports that the enemy had broken through into the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is not true. This does not correspond to reality. Ultimately, even if this were true, there is no need to pick up and spread this message in such a context, because the enemy has not broken through into Dnipropetrovsk region. First of all, the expansion of this gray zone only indicates that attacks are reaching as far as Dakhne. After all, they reached Dnipropetrovsk region not only from the Dakhne location, they also come through here, and they come through the Yalta area as well. And by the way, you could just as well sit here with a ruler and count that in Yalta, the Redor rather, gray zone has also expanded. And this too is about the enemy crossing the border between Donetsk and the Dnipropetrovsk regions. In fact, Russians have already entered the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region in 3 locations. The third one was previously Horikov. And here they planted their flags, celebrated in some way, tried to create an informational effect. And I've said dozens of times that the main goal of these enemy actions, there is no operational or strategic objective here. The main goal is informational and propagandistic tour, run into the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, plant a flag, and that's it. To escape from there, preferably alive, although that rarely happens. And then once the flag has been planted, to blow this tiny spark into a great blaze of media influence on Ukrainians, as if to say, here it is. The war has spread to yet another Ukrainian region, and the Russians are trying to break through into the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region precisely for informational purposes. There is no other truly significant strategic objective here except to influence our minds through information. And so who else but Ukrainian media, I'm speaking broadly here, including Telegram channels, will, in quotes, help Ukrainians perceive this information saying supposedly that the enemy has broken through into Dnipropetrovsk region, even though, I repeat once again, this objectively is not the case. And even if it does happen, friends, it is not a catastrophe, it's just a fact. The war is ongoing in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The war is not about preventing the enemy from crossing into Dnipropetrovsk region. But despite what I just said, our defense forces are still doing everything necessary, destroying the enemy on all 3 fronts, in the area of Yalta, in the area of Dakhne, and in the area of Orikov. By eliminating these enemy breakthroughs into the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region, the goal is to essentially prevent these so-called informational breakthroughs that are meant to influence the minds of Ukrainians. This is what the defense forces are doing. But no, everyone starts imagining some kind of catastrophic scenarios. Just like catastrophic informational reports are emerging about the Sumy region. I'll be honest, I received several messages yesterday right away, like, oh my God, did you see what the Wall Street Journal wrote? They wrote that we have terrible news, that a terrible, terrible turn of events is happening in the Sumy region. But in fact, what did the Wall Street Journal actually write? They spoke with fighters from the Defense Intelligence Unit, a unit that operates in this Kursk-Sumy direction. This is Timur's group within the main intelligence directorate, specifically with one of the commanders in Timur's group, Kappa, the commander of the special unit Chimera. They talked about the objective facts that exist here. What did they say? Let's analyze what was reported in the Wall Street Journal and why it was turned into such a big sensation. The first thing they reported is that there are about 50,000 enemy troops at this location. Did we not know about this? Tell me that there are 50,000 enemy troops. Didn't Commander-in-Chief Syrski talk about this just a week ago? Of course he did. Of course he talked about it. And so actually we haven't heard any new information here. Next, there's a report that the Russians are just over 20 kilometers away from Sumy region. And do you know what's interesting about these 20 kilometers? That the Russians have been at a distance of 20 plus kilometers from the territory of Sumy region even before the full-scale invasion. From this direction, they are about 20 kilometers away, 20 to 25. From this direction, they are at a distance of 20 to 25 kilometers. And of course, from this location where the enemy has now advanced, they are also about 20 kilometers away. Is this news to us? But for some reason, Ukrainians pay a lot of attention to what the Wall Street Journal writes, and they say, oh my God, there are 50,000 there, as if the commander-in-chief isn't talking about it, as if our troops don't understand this. Oh my God, it's 20 kilometers. As if you can't see this on the deep state map. And then, as a third fact, they, like many people, as I said, even asked me yesterday, completely shocked. They say Russian troops outnumber Ukrainian ones 3-1. Come on, seriously? And what did you think? That's against 50,000 Russian troops in the Sumy direction. How many are standing on the Ukrainian side? 50,000 Ukrainians or at least 20,000 Ukrainians? Of course, that number is much, much smaller. I don't know exactly what it is, but to be surprised that there are 3 times fewer of us, well, to me, that seems at the very least strange. At the very least, so all these information manipulations, speculations really need to be dismissed, and we need to objectively analyze the actual situation as it is. Objectively, nothing has changed in the Sumy region compared to, for example, the end of last week when we talked about the relative stabilization of these areas in the Sumy region. Now, the third piece of propaganda bait concerns Zaporizhzhia. Although here, it's not so much an informational psychological bait as it is the objective reality that the enemy is clearly intensifying its actions in this section of the front, in the Vasylivka direction, so to speak. In the area of the settlement of Kamyansk, they are stepping up and intensifying combat operations, but getting ahead of themselves, they are already claiming to have captured the settlement of Kamyansk. So what actually happened here? A Russian soldier in this direction crossed the Yanchikrak river. Basically, he crossed the river, crossing hung up the Russian tricolor, and the Russians on their part declared the capture of Kamyanka. This happened yesterday. And yes, they really are trying to capture Kamyanka. So far, they haven't captured it yet. Raising a flag doesn't mean anything, but Kamyanka, I mean, oh God, Kamyansk, they really are doing this, trying to do it. Raising a flag doesn't mean anything. But I'll repeat, the Russians are definitely continuing to press forward in this area. They are trying to move their troops to the other side of the Yanchikrak River in this direction in order to capture both Kamyansk and, in fact, to begin shelling the nearest and closest area, the settlement of Stepno Hills, which is our next line, our defensive strip end, to try to get their artillery at least to the outskirts of the city of Zaporizhzhia. Zaporizhzhia is quite a sprawling city along the Dnipro River. Here, you can see that up to Balabain, it's basically the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia, and the Russians are trying to make tactical moves in the direction of Kamyansk to reach artillery positions to start shelling Zaporizhzhia. That is their informational objective. Again, it is an informational and propaganda goal. It is for this reason that they claim to have taken Kamyansk. Although overall, in principle, first of all, this does not correspond to reality, but in general, in the Zaporizhzhia direction, we should expect increased enemy activity. There hasn't been any movement here for a very long time, so the enemy might not be fortifying, and we Ukrainians think that there is some element of surprise here. No, there is absolutely no element of surprise. In addition to all this, our resistance movement, our resistance forces are actively monitoring any movements of the Russians in the south. We even know the number of enemy resources that have been moved to the Zaporizhzhia front recently. Mostly these are in Polokhy, Orykiv, and a bit in Huliaipol. We are aware of all the resources being moved there, including their quantities. It is even known about the recent movement and rotation of Kadyrovites and Akhmat fighters, who, according to available data, are not being moved to reinforce the front lines, but rather these Kadyrovets are being relocated to the occupied Enerhodar with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power. 15 trucks accordingly passed through Mariupol over the course of last weekend. And these Kadyrovites, as far as I know, are entering the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with the purpose of exercising control over the civilian population, over the civilian workers and engineers who have remained to work at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. In other words, they are performing something like a police function. This is not some kind of strike force. These are not even units that would form blocking detachments or anything like that. These are simply police officers who are entering the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Another issue is that, unfortunately, they are using the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as cover, knowing that, of course, none of our drones will strike it because it is far too dangerous. But overall, this is not some great military force, just another redeployment of Akhmat units. So, to sum up, friends, there is some enemy advancement in the Novopavlivka direction, but there's no need to blow this up into some big story about the war supposedly spreading to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Even if and when, and this will definitely happen in the near future, the war does spread directly to the Dnipropetrovsk region, and there are occupiers' boots on the ground there. This is not really a topic for active discussion at all. Now, regarding Zaporizhzhia, yes, there will be information attacks about the capture of Kamyansky and other districts, and yes, we should expect an intensification of fighting there. Now, regarding Sumy, we are discussing statements that are absolutely empty in terms of their exclusivity, as if they are something new or significant. Although, objectively, there's no reason to do so. Regarding the shelling of Russian territory, I also don't know how much sense it makes to talk about the effectiveness of these strikes right now. We'll be looking into it throughout the day, but the fact is that yesterday Russian Telegram channels and Russian media were filled with reports about missile threats from Ukraine. Those are the results as of today. Tomorrow we'll talk more about some of the numbers that we managed to gather. One clear figure is that June has become, and this is the first very alarming and serious warning sign, June was the first month when the Russians continuously used strike drones like Shahed, Geran, Gerbera, and similar types every single day. That is, this is the first month when every day and every night they launched at least one drone. This is an unpleasant trend. On that note, I will end here. Thank you, friends, for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and see you next time.